and welcome. You're listening to Tales of the Sea. I'm Mark Winkworth. Thanks for joining me as we launch the first episode of Season 3. Today I want to take a look at those strange-looking, gelatinous, floating blobs in the sea that often look like deflated balloons with long strings attached. In fact, this summer, beachgoers along the coast of Maine, where I live, have observed some of these creatures as large as 5 feet in diameter, trailing tentacles as long as 100 feet. These sea creatures are collectively known as jellyfish, which seems like a cute enough name, but those who are in the know avoid them like the plague, because some varieties can use their tentacles to sting you with needle-sharp mini-harpoons called nematocysts, capable of injecting a toxic venom, causing pain, often a lot of pain, that can affect your respiratory system, which can be extremely dangerous, and in severe cases even cause paralysis and death in as little as 20 minutes. These creatures, commonly known as jellies, are over 500 million years old. That's right, they predate the dinosaurs by over 200 million years. They can be brilliantly colorful or bioluminescent or completely transparent. Most of the 4,000 species of jellyfish cause only pain and discomfort when they sting humans. However, cubozoans, commonly called box jellyfish, of which some 50 species inhabit tropical and temperate seas around the globe, can be fatal. When conditions are favorable, jellyfish can form vast swarms, which may damage fishing gear or fill fishing nets, and sometimes even clog power plants' intakes or other systems that use water for their source of energy. I was out sailing in Camden, Maine this summer, and not too far offshore in the cold Maine waters, we spotted a huge jelly known as a lion's mane. For its shape and its color, the lion's mane is one of the largest jellyfish on the planet. Lion's mane jellies, sometimes called sea blubbers, can sting humans, and while not deadly, it's anything but pleasant. Why are jellyfish important for us to know about? What are their considerable numbers in recent years telling us about the health of our oceans? And what can jellies tell us about the marine ecosystems? Well, quite a lot, it turns out. I had the opportunity recently to speak with Dr. Angel Yanagihara, a world-renowned biochemist, diver, Fulbright specialist, and the director of the Pacific Cnidaria Research Lab. She's also a professor in the Bekasi Laboratory of Neurobiology in the Pacific Biosciences Research Center, located in Honolulu, Hawaii. Her work on jellyfish, their stings and deadly venom, was also the subject of a recent NOVA documentary. In addition, she served as the jellyfish consultant and diver on Diana Nyad's fourth and fifth, finally successful attempt to swim from Cuba to Key West, Florida. More about that a little later in the episode. Dr. Yanagihara, Angel, had a very unusual start to her career in studying jellyfish and their deadly toxins. When we spoke, I had a million questions, the first one being, what was it like to be stung and nearly die from an attack by a deadly, poisonous box jellyfish?
Well, I have been a lifelong ocean swimmer, so I've seen jellyfish in other parts of the world. And the particular day that I was stung by box jellyfish in Hawaii, I was starting out my swim, as I usually do, around 6 a.m. And an old woman warned me that I shouldn't swim because these little clear blobs she was pointing at were very dangerous, and they were called box jellyfish. I didn't know what that meant. I looked at her. I just thought, how dangerous could it be? Because I was training for a big swim and I didn't want to miss the opportunity to swim. So I pushed off and I was out for almost an hour doing about a mile and a half swim. And as I came back to the shore, I came through the narrows, and it's about 15 feet deep. And all of a sudden, I felt tiny pricks on my neck. And I thought maybe it was a ghost fishing line or something. And it was needles, and then it was burning, and then it was like shocking. And so then I did a dive down to the sand about 15 feet deep to get away from whatever that was. And I came back up, and whatever it was far more there and was hitting every part of my body that wasn't covered by the lycra. And then I suddenly remembered the woman and her warning, and I looked around and I couldn't really see anything, but then I could feel like stringy things in the water. Immediately, I started gasping, and my lungs started to fill with fluid, and I was wheezing. So I went onto my back to try to open my lungs and get some air. And then I tried to calm myself down because I had been a Red Cross lifeguard, so I understood the importance of remaining calm. But nothing I did helped. And suddenly I realized I was in real trouble because over 20 feet of water, 15, 20 feet of water, and about a quarter mile from the shore, and there was no one on the shore. So I was suddenly filled with dread and deeply regretted not listening to the woman.
Oh, it's frightening. What happened next?
Well, this is the strangest part because I was very weak. I tried to swim. I couldn't get any effective stroke. I couldn't breathe. And I felt convinced that I was a goner, that I was going to drown at any minute. But somehow muscle memory must have clicked in because the next thing I remember, I actually was on the sand and I struggled to get to my feet. And when I do the math, it took me about 30 minutes to swim that tiny third of a mile. It was definitely a miserable stroke, if anything, but I have no memory of it. And then there were freshwater shower on the beach there. So I thought that would be perfect to get rid of this burning pain. Got to the shower, I pulled the shower, and it was the worst thing possible. It was like boiling oil was
Oh,
being
boy.
dumped on my skin. And I had a quarter in my Speedo, so I went to, there was a payphone nearby, but I couldn't talk because I was wheezing so bad. And then the Waikiki Aquarium is right there, so I tapped on the glass with the quarter, and that's all I remember. And the next thing I came to in an ambulance, and they had me covered with saran wrap and vinegar, and there was a meat tenderizer next to all these medical instruments. So I was very suspicious about what was this treatment.
Yeah, meat tenderizer. Wow. So someone obviously called emergency services and they got there, but you really have no memory of that.
No, I mean, I lost consciousness. I mean, my memory falls out at different points and the whole, history of the event. But yeah, so once they had me in the ambulance and had me on oxygen, etc., I was in excruciating pain, and they suggested to put me in a hot shower.
And that would be right there at the aquarium.
I, of course, agreed to whatever you want to do. And so they put me in the hot shower, and after about 15 minutes, I started feeling better. And so, I told them, well, thank you, I'll just drive home now. And they're like, no, 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 you need to go to the hospital. This is a very serious medical emergency. And I said, no, it can't possibly be. It's a jellyfish sting, and I don't want to waste your time with that. So anyway, I had this little battle with them, and I signed out against medical advice because I was convinced that this couldn't be that serious. And as I was driving back to my apartment, the whole thing came back on again in a massive doubling down of the pain, and it was just absolutely excruciating.
Wow.
I finally did get home, but then again, I wasn't out of the woods.
So, did you ever end up going to the hospital?
No, I didn't. I never went to the hospital. My husband's a physician, so I asked him to come, and I really did feel like this should not be taking up important emergency room time. And I asked him what to do for all of this, and he really didn't know what to do. I mean, he had topical steroids and this sort of thing. And so I tried that and the hot baths, but there was no real clear medical intervention aside from serious opioid analgesics. So I just bared through it with 3 days of agony.
Oh, man, 3 days. That's nuts.
Well, the problem is that this is an area of a lot of noise in terms of authoritative claims and very little statistically sound evidence based therapeutic options.
I've got to say, that sounds a bit frightening.
It's kind of the Wild West. Each clinician will do their best to address symptoms as they arise.
Yeah, I can't help but think, Angel, that, this is 1997. That's quite a few years ago. And there was really no accepted protocol. There was a lot of disagreement, probably. But we're talking about a venom that could have killed you then and is still, capable of killing people today. So, what do you credit your having survived this? Because you could have died.
So that's a pretty complex question and probably beyond the the length of our podcast.
Agreed. Okay, the good news is you survived, but as you've told me, a lot of people don't survive, even today. But we're going to get back to that because we'll get into your training and where things are today. All these years later, can you give listeners a little bit of an idea of the history of jellyfish, just in terms of the type of organism they are? And the fact that they're called jellyfish, are they even fish?
So they certainly aren't fish. They're one of the oldest multicellular life forms on the planet. Basically, the only other organisms that are multicellular older than them are the sponges and what's called ctenophores, which are also gelatinous clear blobs. So these animals predate vertebrates, so they definitely are not fish. They don't have bones. They have existed for over 600 million years, and they've been through all kinds of different environments on this planet. They started out with an environment which was basically very low oxygen, high carbon dioxide, methane. They coexisted with marine bacteria, and basically they developed these venoms to fight one another. So it was a turf war amongst corals for real estate. So they would battle each other with this venoms, and it's interesting that these venoms that they developed so long ago in that ancient environment are basically the top of the toxicity chart, if you will, in terms of things that could kill us.
Interesting.
It was never a sinister attempt to undermine our downfall, obviously, but humans are uniquely vulnerable in that environment.
So, what part do they play in the marine ecosystem?
They're very important. They actually provide food for larval fish, eat larval jellies, and other organisms. So the complex food web that comprises the marine ecosystem includes jellyfish.
The worldwide population of jellyfish is increasing, I believe. Is that cause for concern?
The problem really, I think, comes about because of our mismanagement. So when we have situations in which there's overfishing, when there's pollution runoff, these are things which undermine the natural balance of power. And these, unfortunately, the last domino to fall in that situation are the jellies. So we can lose fish from overfishing, from pollution, from oxygen deplete zones, but the jellies will take up that space in the bioweb.
So, when they show up in great numbers and we accidentally venture into their space, they don't so much as attack. They don't have the ability to attack. If anything, defending their space, right? Against some unknown creature.
Well, I would have to push back on that a little bit. That's certainly true with certain jellies, the more primitive jellies, the Scyphozoa, those that are radially symmetrical. The box jellies, however, with their fourfold symmetry, like a box with four sides, have eyes. And each of those four sides has an eye stalk. And on each eye stalk are six visual organs that we could call eyes. Two of each of those on each of the four are like our own, with a lens and an iris that can focus and hunt. The other four are more ancient light pigments, so they can just sense photons and they can actually sense in the deep ocean then light and dark.
Interesting.
These box jellyfish are capable of hunting. As I go out at night to capture them, they are attracted to my lights. They do hunt prey, and they do have senses that allow them to detect motion, frequencies such as heartbeat, taste, etc. The box jellyfish are more sophisticated. They could very easily be attracted to a swimmer and even come to a swimmer, and certainly that does occur at night with when I have lights. Whereas the more primitive scyphozoan jellies, it's more of us getting into their food bucket and running into them. But for the box jellyfish, that could arguably be a different situation.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because I think of so many jellyfish as just kind of drifting along with the current, waves, and occasionally washing up on the beach, like the giant lion's mane jellyfish this summer in Maine. But the box actually has the ability to see a prey. It doesn't have to wait for one to like show up on its doorstep and get itself over to find a meal.
Well, they're very, very strong swimmers. In fact, when I've participated in some of these documentaries covering this project, we've swum from offshore as scuba divers, and the jellies are coming in purposefully to spawn. This particular type of box jellyfish comes in 8 to 10 days after the full moon, and it swims against a tide. It's a very strong swimmer, stronger than we were as divers. There's a lot that we might assume from the lay perspective that gets turned on its head when you start talking about these box jellyfish.
Jellies are just one member of a complex ecosystem, and that ecosystem depends on a certain balance, as you said. But what happens when an ecosystem gets out of balance?
There's a few ways to kind of address that question. On the one side, there are balanced members of a complex food web that you hardly notice because they're kept in check. And when you disrupt the balance of power, they become an absolute nuisance. So in Hawaii, people had long ago said, well, wait a minute, I never saw box jellies when I was a kid. Why is it that we have the beaches closed almost every, 8 to 10 days after each full moon on certain sides of the island? The fact is that they actually have been here and recorded and probably were here before the Hawaiian Islands were even here.
Wow.
They're a global species. They've been in these areas for millions of years. That being said, there are species which the range we see is now changing, and the range of the species could be due to temperature. It could also be due to other things such as pollution and runoff and algae populations and zooplankton populations. So all of these things could change the range where particular jellyfish are found. But the numbers in general we know definitely can be massively changed in areas where they've long been a member of the ecosystem and hardly even noticed.
Interesting. Okay, I want to jump back and do kind of a quick look at your background, including growing up, education, fascination with the sea, and how you got to where you are today.
I double majored in biology and chemistry in college, but I would say that my scientific career started when I was about three, in a little tin boat in Alaska with my dad fishing. I kept track as he was fishing of the starfish on the granite boulder walls underwater near where we were, and I kept track each day, and I tried to calculate how many and where they were.
Okay, you're 3 years old. You're counting starfish,
That's right.
their numbers, their movements, and you're thinking, yeah, this is what I want to do the
That's
rest of my life.
It wasn't something that I ever decided to do. It was just something that I've always done in terms of being curious about the environment and interested in documenting that and thinking about that and trying to, consider what are the deeper things that could, we could learn from these things.
And what about your dad?
My father was a big waterman, swimmer, and sailor, and almost everything we did growing up had to do with the water. He claimed that he taught me to swim before I could walk. I mean, I was born in Alaska, so I do remember friends, our relatives coming up to visit and being horrified that I was swimming in I don't know, 45-degree water, and my dad told
Right.
him, well, it's the warmest water she's ever known, kind of thing. So,
She thinks it's warm. Yeah.
but yeah, no, I've always been a water person. It's something that I didn't go into academically. I studied biology and chemistry, and then I did a PhD work in biochemistry. So I was actually doing proper academic biochemistry, if you will, when this whole thing occurred, and I ended up in an ambulance.
That being the fateful night on the beach with the box jellyfish.
I did a quick literature search to see, what could possibly explain this venom and how horrible it was. And then I found that there were actually these box jellyfish, various species of them, that were incredibly lethal in Australia. And I looked into the nature of those animals and what had been done in terms of researching the venom, and very little, if anything, had been done. So I wrote a proper research proposal to look at that from a biochemical standpoint, and that was funded. So that was in 1997, and I thought, take me about a year. It's such a simple ancient organism. How hard could it be? So that was, over 25 years ago.
Right. Talk about time flying. Back to jellies for a second, not that we've left them for very long. Approximately how many species of jellies are there, and how many are considered lethal to human beings?
Well, basically, they all belong to the phylum called Cnidaria, and that is defined by this explosive tiny organelle that has a harpoon that can inject venom, Cnidae.
Okay, so the phylum is the category or the grouping of related organisms, and they all have these sharp structures like little mini harpoons that can inject venom into another creature.
And this phylum includes the anemones, corals, the more ancient jellies, the round ones, the Scyphozoa, the Hydrozoa, also another class called the Staurozoa, and then the most sophisticated and specialized one class, the Cubozoa.
The box jellyfish.
I think probably over 1,000 species.
And how many are dangerous to humans?
Essentially, most of the cubozoa are dangerous, and some of these other Scyphozoa, the large lion's mane, can be dangerous. Portuguese man of war, and then there's other Cnidaria, the fire coral. So only a handful, really, of this whole phylum are medically relevant with regard to human sting outcomes.
You talked a little bit about propagation, the multiplication of jellies around the world. Do we pretty much understand the mechanisms of most of the jellies, how they propagate, and how they travel through the world, through the oceans? Is it pretty well known at this point, or are there a lot of mysteries that are still out there about jellies?
No, the life cycles are pretty well understood. And so there's both sexual and asexual propagation. The cubozoa essentially propagate through sexual reproduction with males and females being separate individuals. And they have this kind of spawning behavior where the males broadcast the sperm into the water columns taken up by the females. Then a certain number of the eggs will be fertilized and become embryo, and the females will drop this embryo strand, and the tiny embryos will then develop into what's called planulae, which are free swimming little tiny jellies essentially that then look for a proper substrate. It could be coral, it could be an oyster shell in a mangrove root system, etc. And when they get to the right size, then they metamorph into almost a microscopic 1 millimeter type size ephemerae, or sort of a tiny, tiny jelly. And then they now are free swimming and feed. They have the same Cnidae, tiny explosive stinging cells that can capture the microscopic prey, and they grow. And essentially, these tiny microscopic free swimming jellies then can become all the way to the size of a basketball in the case of the chiroptropid.
I wondered, are jellies confined to salt water only, or do some live in brackish or even freshwater?
I do believe that there are freshwater hydrozoa. Um, it's not really my field, but I think that is true. But for the most part, they are marine species.
Meaning saltwater. They
Correct.
need to be in the oceans, yeah. I did read about one jellyfish that was called the immortal jellyfish.
Right. Well, it's Turritopsis dornii, and that is a famous story. And in fact, other jellies can kind of do the same thing. So basically, these animals, in times when food is not available, these animals then can degrow and can create a type of a cyst and then survive all kinds of hardship. I think even basic dehydration until the point of the marine environment returning and then being able to develop again and go through the life cycle to the point of being a well-developed adult. Kind of being able to go backwards in time is fascinating.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like I'm going to go back to my former self
That's right.
so I can survive.
Exactly.
I can see why they might be called immortal. It's kind of wild. Certain cultures also, I read, consider them edible, like a delicacy. Have you ever eaten a jellyfish?
Well, yes, I've eaten them. I don't know about being necessarily a delicacy, but they certainly are a food of last resort. Especially, I've seen this in the Philippines with collapsing fisheries that jelly explosive numbers in certain parts of the summer become a potential food source. The Chinese have elevated that to actual aquaculture and raising these animals and then contracting with fishermen in the Gulf of Mexico and other areas who've lost their livelihoods in terms of shrimping or fishing and turn to using their nets for jellies, for cannonball jellies, and then for producing those to send to offshore to China. Once this tissue that comprises the jelly is dehydrated, it is a nutritional source of certain fats and a certain amount of calories.
The box jellies in particular appear or seem to be in only certain parts of the world, as you've mentioned. And is there a reason for that? To have to do with temperature or just a particular place in the world? I mean, they don't show up everywhere, apparently, right?
Well, the number of species that are cubozoa is rather small when we compare them to the other classes of Cnidaria. But these species are globally present, and for the most part, they are tropical or semi tropical. But they do exist in other areas, such as off Cape Town, South Africa. There's a four tentacled box jelly species that lives in that rather cold water, also in the Caribbean, in the Mediterranean. There are pelagic animals, pelagic box jellyfish that we find in the deep sea in the Gulf of Mexico and off of Florida. Then there are real hotspots of the largest family of box jellies, the chirodropids, Chironex species, in the ASEAN region. So Indonesia, Thailand, Australia, Philippines, Malaysia. Those are hotspots for the largest box jellies, the chirodropids, which are real killers.
Hmm.
But the four tentacled box jellyfish are widely distributed around the world, in Florida, but for the most part, the continental U.S. would not find them along those coasts.
Angel, from that day on the beach in 1977 to today, here in the summer of 2025, you've been on a personal and professional quest to not only understand the nature of the deadly box jellyfish venom, but to discover a life-saving treatment that would protect anyone exposed to and stung by this potentially deadly creature. And by any measure, you have succeeded, and then some, with treatments that are in worldwide use today. Looking back, what was the key to unlocking the secret as to why this venom is so dangerous to humans?
From the biochemical standpoint of when one looks at a venom, basically we're looking at a complex mixture of components. We use different separations to separate the components one from another, large proteins, small proteins, peptides, etc. And then we test each class and fractionate them. So having done that, I found that one component, which is less than 1% of the biomass of everything in the venom, was the driver of lethality, the locomotive, if you will. So I went about to really study that component, and I found that it's very similar to the tools of even more ancient organisms on the planet, pathogenic bacteria. And so a lot of bacteria use a bullet, basically.
And like all bullets, they create
holes in cells.
Wow.
And in anthrax and strep and a lot of these pathogenic bacteria, you have what's called a porin, a pore-forming protein. And these proteins basically quickly get through into the plasma, into your bloodstream. They will set up on any cell that they touch, and these can self-assemble like a string of pearls and create a stable rivet hole in that target cell.
Like a pathway right into the cell.
And at which point the cell then is susceptible to dying. In the case of the cubozoa venoms,
that would be the box jellyfish venoms,
I found an extremely potent pore-forming protein that works in levels of picograms per mil. So extremely, extremely potent, over 1,000 times more potent than anthracite O anthrax, and also far more rapidly working. So I did the amino acid N-terminal sequence and then others, and I found that there was a calcium binding domain, and I did electron microscopy, and I found that these monomers need to self-assemble, and I reasoned that they could be doing this through the calcium binding domain. So I went to look for inhibitors of that event, and I found that a particular valence state of copper that we find in copper gluconate will compete with calcium for that binding domain and prevent that from happening. So all of the technologies that I've brought forward that are life-saving are based upon that discovery, and it's a basic mechanistic observation of what's the fastest acting agent in the venom and how do we stop that.
So, Angel, forgive a huge oversimplification, but bottom line, it sounds like it's all about finding inhibitors to that process of cell destruction.
Yes.
You mentioned once that you mentioned earlier, actually, that humans are particularly vulnerable to this venom, and the reason for that, unlike a lot of other creatures in the sea who are not as vulnerable even as humans are. And that has to do with cellular structure?
If you imagine being stung by a jelly, these explosive stinging capsules inject the venom through these hollow tubules that get everted, and they act like little microscopic hypodermic needles. So the venom is being pumped directly into the epidermis, the dermis, and to the capillaries.
That isn't the same thing happening when a box jelly attacks a fish?
And the real interesting difference is that the fish erythrocytes, red blood cells, are nucleated. So they're capable of repair, whereas human red blood cells are not. So, we've made this deal to have as much oxygen carrying capacity as possible in our blood. And in the deal, we lost the nucleus so we could pack more hemoglobin per red blood cell. But that makes us uniquely vulnerable to this venom.
Just a quick side note here. I can think of no more potent or dramatic example of Angel's life-saving treatment for box jellyfish stings than that of Diana Nyad's final 2 attempts to swim from the island of Cuba across more than 100 miles of open water to reach Key West, Florida. I'm sure a lot of listeners out there know who Diana Nyad is. She's in her 70s now, but in 2013, at age 64, she successfully swam from Havana, Cuba to Key West, Florida. That's a distance of 110 miles in shark-infested and box jellyfish-infested waters, all the while battling extremely strong currents. The feat had been accomplished twice before, but in those crossings the swimmers used shark cages or fins or took rests on their escort craft. Diana did not. She swam non-stop, unaided, braving multiple dangers, and after 4 previous attempts, the first when she was only 28 years old, she was finally successful. The movie about this extraordinary feat is called Nyad, starring Annette Bening as Diana Nyad and Jodie Foster as her coach. They were both nominated for Oscars for their roles in the film. Diana wrote a book about the adventure. It's called Find a Way. I'm telling you this because, as luck and timing would have it, I have a good friend in California who knows Diana Nyad pretty well. And when I told her I was researching an episode on jellyfish, she said, "There is one person you really have to talk to, Angel Yanagihara. She's not only an expert on jellyfish, but she was a consultant and diver on Diana's final 2 attempts to swim from Cuba to Florida." Angel, how did you become involved with Diana and her team?
I got an email out of the blue, and it was a bunch of questions, and I didn't recognize the name of the person. So I usually kind of just delete, but something caught my eye. So I Googled her name, and she had a TED Talk. So I listened to the TED Talk, and I was blown away by this person. That just a phenomenal, force of nature. And so I read her email very carefully, 20 questions. So I answered each of them in great detail, and I, sent it off. And then I heard nothing. So I thought, well, that was that. But then after a few days, I got this, in 16-point font, "Who are you?" And it was like, and I'm like, oh no, what have I done? so so I read through this, and she said, well, you've answered our questions the most detail of anyone, and we really appreciate your time, and we'd like to invite you to come speak to the team physicians and EMTs, and share the information, etc., in your publications. And they were actually in Key West, Florida. And it was just fortuitous because I had a grant with Special Operation Command, who has a combat dive school near Key West. So I happened to be going there anyway. So I said, well, yes, I could stop by when I was there. So I did, and kind of went through all of our work and publications and understanding of the pathophysiology with her clinical team. And then, we'd like you to come with us. And I said, no, I can't possibly do that. I have a full-time teaching load. No, we'd like you to go with us from Havana to Key West and be in the team. And I said, no, I really couldn't possibly do that. And so they kept insisting and insisting. And I kept saying, no, that's not possible. And then I looked at one point, and I just understood, because she had almost died on her 3rd attempt because she'd been injected with epinephrine.
Right, as a result of a box jellyfish attack.
And there's reasons that is extremely dangerous and potentially detrimental or deadly.
And as I understand it, can affect the heart, the lungs.
And organ failure and cerebral hemorrhage has been a cause of death in some of these irukandji stings, which is essentially what she had presented with. When I looked and I saw, the seriousness, I suddenly relented, because I could see them going again, things going sideways, and this woman might lose her life, because it was that important that they accomplish all this.
And at that point, you joined the team for what would be their 4th attempt at the crossing. And it was not without incident, as I recall from both the book and the film. There was a terrible squall, the boat at one point taking on water, numerous jellyfish, including the deadly box jelly, and ultimately that 4th attempt was scrubbed. But the following year, the team once again prepared to make the crossing. And once again, you joined the team for that attempt. Angel, what preventative measures were put in place for this 5th attempt?
So she had both a lycra rash guard, if you will, bodysuit on, a sting suit, and then in parts of the body which couldn't be covered with lycra, then I have a different formulation. There's one that's available to the public, stingnomore.com, that has the treatments, the technology for the treatment of stings, based upon the copper gluconate inhibition of venom. And then a different technology that's not available to the public, but is available to ocean swimmers, that is a preventative.
Another quick side note here. After nearly 20 years in development, Angel and her team brought their product Sting No More to the market to help prevent and treat the effects of the venomous box jellyfish. It was this patented product that was used to cover the open skin, including the face, neck, hands, and feet of Diana Nyad as she attempted what would be her final and ultimately successful swim from Cuba to Key West, Florida. Angel, you did mention at one point that you had always thought that the science was the hard part, only to learn that communication and coordination of information and sharing around the world really was the thing that was needed and the toughest thing to get. So and as I recall, I think you were talking about the fact that treatment today, there is no universal, still 2025, there's not an accepted universal protocol for these serious types of stings. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, crazy question, but how could that be?
This is a huge issue. And unfortunately, there's a lot of, cooks in the kitchen, a lot of papers that come out. But experimental design is everything. For instance, there's some papers that came out that said for anybody who gets stung, you should rinse the body with seawater, not vinegar. That using vinegar will cause site pain and worsen the tentacles load, the venom load. You should rinse with seawater. Well, unfortunately, the conclusion is completely opposite of what one sees in reality, right? Obviously, we are being stung in seawater. So if seawater were helpful, then we wouldn't be stung in the first place. And vinegar causes a structural change in the undischarged nidae. It pickles them, and some of them will rupture, but none of them can effectively inject their venom into your body. And it does cause a little bit of site pain because it's a weak acid and you have some abrasion to your skin. You have some perforation where you've been stung, but it pickles those tentacles and nidae that haven't yet fired. So, in fact, the evidence shows when you have a direct activity reporter, when you design your experiment with a direct reporter to venom, you see that vinegar is the best of those options. So the communication, even within the scientific literature, is messy. So when you kind of double that through to try to communicate to the lay population, that becomes even more complicated.
So the work goes on. And it's fascinating. And you've been wildly generous of your time, and thank you. But I do want to ask you one thing. And that's the final thing is, do you have a favorite tale of the sea? That could be a story or a book or a song or anything that has influenced you and that maybe you come back to time and again.
My, I guess, 14th great grandfather on Cape Cod was apparently the first person to be arrested in the New World in the Plymouth colony,
Oh,
and he was
my.
arrested for rowing his rowboat on a Sunday. So I guess it's long in my bloodline to be in the water.
I should say so.
But in terms of just kind of published, that's bigger tale. I find Diana Nyad's Find a Way. I
Ah,
really did appreciate that
sure.
because I lived it, obviously. But
You absolutely did. It's a great book.
yeah, no, I mean, culturally, I'm a water person. I love the water. I, I hate to be too far from it at any time. And I think, we humans can be better stewards of our marine environment, but we should also, definitely take time to enjoy it.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you, Angel, for your time today. This has been a real treat. Educational, entertaining, great fun. I knew it would be. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Before we end this episode, I'm excited and pleased to share a brief conversation I had a short time ago with Diana Nyad. We just heard Angel say that one of her favorite books is Diana Nyad's Find a Way, the inspiring true story of one woman's pursuit of a lifelong dream. Diana, there was a moment of deep resolve and renewed commitment to this effort that occurred on your third attempt to swim from Cuba to Florida in the summer of 2011. At one point, you had a swarm of box jellies that ended the attempt and very nearly ended your life. What was your message to the team at that point?
We are never going to quit this thing until we make it. We need the world's leading expert on the box jellyfish. We were researching it. Steve Munatonis, who is kind of the word in open water swimming history and connections, led us very quickly to Angel. And when we brought Angel on, I thought, you know what? I can't just swim through these things again saying, oh, don't worry, I'm tough. It's mind over matter. I'll get through them. You won't get through them. You may not die, but you are going to be, incapacitated to a severe degree. And that's when Angel said she was inspired. She wanted to rise to the occasion of finding the solution, of us getting through these animals. And she did. She is a always listed at the top of my valued teammates.
Understandably.
Well, don't tell Bonnie that, because Bonnie's at the very top. That's my trainer. And the navigator, all of them, the whole team is extremely important. But Angel, let's face it, she helped me make sure that I stayed alive through that thing.
Yeah, not only did you stay alive, but you accomplished one of the most impressive feats in long-distance swimming history.
You get lucky sometimes. So it could be that with research and, just speaking to Angel and getting her research and reading it all, that we would have been okay. But the truth is she's worked for literally a couple of decades developing this product, this antidote. But if there is a sting, that she can get to you. She got to me in the water when I was stung on that 5th time. She got to me right there and said, where is it? Where's the sting? Where are you feeling? I said, the right ankle, right here, outside. And she got that stuff and spread it on, and it brought down the effects radically and immediately. So she's doing the public at large, great service.
Well, that she certainly is.
And on a lighter note, I'll tell you that if I ever find box jellyfish on a restaurant,
oh, no.
I still have PTSD from those animals. That's one thing that's off the menu for me.
Oh, again, thank you so much for your time, Diana.
Thanks, Mark.
Delightful to meet you virtually, and be well.
Good luck to you.
Thank you. That ends this episode of Tales of the Sea. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell a friend or two. And a very special thanks to my guest today, Dr. Angel Yanagihara. This episode was produced at Montjoy Studios in Portland, Maine. As always, special thanks to my producer, Jules Selbo. And remember, you'll find this podcast, Tales of the Sea, wherever you stream your favorite podcast. I'm Mark Winkworth. Thanks for listening.